Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you and myself. So my name is Carmen Dillman, and I am a sophomore at St. Louis University studying marketing. And I also ran the DJ hour this morning, and I'm your moderator for this session. And I will be introducing the amazing Erica Lord. So Erica is an interdisciplinary artist who explores concepts and issues that exist within a contemporary Indigenous experience and how culture and identity are affected in a rapidly changing world. Lord draws on her experience of growing up between Alaska and Upper Michigan and her mixed race cultural identity drawn from her Athabaskan, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this.
Athabaskan.
Yes. Thank you. Finnish, Swedish, Japanese, and English descent. In order to address a multiple or mixed identity, Lord uses a variety of mediums to construct her new, ambiguous, or challenging representations of race and culture. Lord received her Bachelor of Arts from Carleton College and a Master of Fine Arts at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Lord has exhibited nationally and internationally, including the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts in Santa Fe, the Musée du Quai Branley, Paris, the National Gallery of Canada, the Smithsonian Institution, at both the National Museum of the American Indian and the American Art Museum, Renwick Gallery. Currently, Lord lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she continues her art practice and teaches at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Please help me welcome Erica Lord.
Thank you very much. Is my voice level okay? All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to share this and talk with you guys because this is like no joke, like a literal dream come true to be able to talk to people outside of my discipline that are connected to science and medicine and health and everything. So it's where the project started, and it's nice to kind of bring it back. So I'll tell you more about that. But thank you very much. Yep, I'm here in Santa Fe right now, and I just felt like it was fate to meet was it Idia? Is it? Or I couldn't remember if it was Ida or Idia, but the two that I met at the Renwick Gallery opening, and that's what led me here. I feel very blessed. So thank you for all being here. So I'm going to start and just to double check, Carmen, you'll let me know if there's questions. Okay. And yeah, please feel free if at any point you want me to, if you have a question along the way or anything, just let me know. One of the things I start out with my students the first day of class, because it explains a lot and it kind of goes into what we're doing here, is that I have two things that kind of direct everything about me, that of how I talk and how I teach and how I lecture. And I have a ADHD, if that's not glaringly obvious, and I have chronic pain. So it affects, like, I might constantly be like moving or adjusting in my seat, or how I talk, especially if I get excited about something, I'll start talking faster and faster and faster and faster. And I don't realize I'm doing it. And I might also mumble at times. So if I'm not clear, or if you need me to slow down or repeat anything, please let me know, because I know I do it. I just don't know when I'm doing it. And so my students have said, like, it's really up and down what days, like sometimes you move in a straight line, sometimes it's like connecting the dots, but with no directions. So hopefully I can lead in a linear way, but that's why, please, if there's some connection that I forgot to make, or you have questions, please let me know. Be to share. All right, so let me, I got the thing. 1 second. Play that. All right. Even though I've done this so much, I still stumble through sharing this. All right. So whenever I do an artist talk, I always start with this quote in this page, because no matter how many times I've done artist talks, like I get very nervous, and it gives me a second to calm down and breathe through it. And also it's a little internal reminder to me that it's okay to be nervous and talk about it, because your voice is important. And so, and when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. And I think that's a lot of this, like defiance and spirit and courage, and that whole idea of speak even if your voice is shaking thing. I really love Audre Lorde. I really love poetry. That's another big reason I was excited to be part of this today. Just all these different ways of, I really think art is healing and important, and another voice that we can tap into. And I use art like largely where writing, music, art, any of that. Right. And so my notes says, trust your voice. So this is where I'm from. The one on the left, I'm from a small village in Alaska. It's about an hour south of Fairbanks. And one of the things I always loved growing up, was my mom telling me about my different backgrounds. And I loved thinking of this idea of all these little points, like eventually coming to this one tiny village where I was. And like just understanding the stories that, like you said, Athabaskan, which is Central Alaska, Iñupiat, which is from Point Barrow, the most northern point, Finnish, Swedish, English, Japanese, and I'm circumpolar. I've got that whole covered. And so most natives like introduce themselves in a sort of traditional way. I can't speak my language, but that's my incredible mom and dad. But on the left, he's got such an afro. I love it so much. My dad's got super curly hair. And so my mom came from Upper Michigan. My dad is from Central Alaska. And so his parents on the right there, my grandma is the Athabaskan part. My grandpa is the Iñupiat part. My mom's side is mostly the Finnish and Swedish, and then a little bit of everything mixed in there in Japanese. So, they're, I don't know, I just want to honor them and introduce them as well, because they helped get me here. All right. So I want to give you a little bit of context of the work I do. As Megan or Carmen said, I work interdisciplinary, so I do photography, sculpture, performance, video, kind of move all over the place. So I was always kind of taught that the concept is what's important, and you figure out what medium best serves that concept. And so because of my crazy mixed background, like literally almost every day growing up, definitely through my 20s, it started calming down a little bit in my 30s, but I didn't know if people didn't ask me because I was older and they respected my space, or if the whole world got a little bit more culturally aware. But every day people would ask me like, what are you? And it wasn't in a nice way. Or are your eyes real? Do I tan? Do I dye my hair? Because something wasn't fitting. Like, I always wondered, like, well, if I had blonde hair, is that more believable? Or if I had brown eyes, is that more believable? Because something about this didn't make sense to them. So these are all my self-portraits, like they're all sort of, but so I started just kind of playing with things where I would change my hair color and eye color and skin color and take portraits over and over and over again. Because a lot of my work deals with like defining or contradicting ideas of who Native people are, what we look like, what people expect, that in the media, I figured there was the only images of Native people out there are this full blood image, traditional images mostly. And that, and in the movies, most of those natives were played by Italians. So no matter how native someone was, they would never be native looking as the movies, because you'd have to be Italian. And so I was just kind of playing with these things. I think there's about 40 pictures in the series. And that was one of the things, because they're just kind of wondering what, I was reading a lot about like this idea of double, or I think it was W.B. Du Bois' concept of triple consciousness. So this idea of like who I think I am, who other people think I am, and then what I think other people think of me. And all those things are constantly going through your head when people are constantly asking you, what are you? Like American, they're like, you know what I mean? And I was like, dependent on the day. Like, I understand genuine curiosity. I'm curious about people's backgrounds too, but it was a sort of weird invasive thing, especially when they wouldn't even ask my name. So I started questioning a lot about that. And since it's about race, I thought it was a visual construct, so it made sense to use photography on my body. And so this is my most famous, or well-known work. I tend to look more native, so I tan quickly, which would often change how people interacted with me, because my skin would change dramatically in, a couple times. And so this idea of, it's not necessarily my idea of what more native is, especially being in Santa Fe and Southwest and New Mexico. Like when I went to school here, people would like, you don't look Indian. And I was like, I'm not, I'm Alaska Native. It looks different. And so wanted to literally, since it was these labels that I felt like were on me or put on me, I wanted to, and since skin is the topic of contention, then I wanted to use skin as the platform for which to talk about this. So I tell them Native, or other labels that called half-breed by even my aunties, and be like, oh, you little half-breed, little Gisick baby, white baby, or you're not even a half-breed, you're a quarter breed or whatever. And I was like, my family doing it was just teasing, but it still gets in your head because, so I first lived in my little village in Alaska, and there, what set me apart was that I was lighter and I had blue eyes. So I was always being told I was white. And then when my parents split, I moved to Michigan with my mom, and there everyone was telling me I was dark and a wild Indian. Growing up a little kid, you're constantly trying to understand why people keep changing their opinion and who am I? So a lot of that identity, and just like through this process, kind of helping me to solidify who I felt comfortable identifying as and how I defined it, that I didn't have to be tan enough to be identified as Native, that I just lost my thought there. I'll think of it. But just kind of playing and challenging it until to find my space. So to be legally Native in this country, to be card carrying, the Bureau of Indian Affairs requires that you are 1/4 blood from the same tribe. And as they moved west, tribes got smaller and smaller. So in Alaska, each village is considered its own tribe. And so there's no way that I'm gonna marry anyone and have children from my 300-person village. Or I went to school with kids that were full-blooded, but they were 8/8, so they weren't considered legally Native. You're not legally Native. You can't call your work Native art legally. So I just, I thought a lot about blood, since it's literally on your card. Your Indian card says 1/4 Athabaskan plus 1/16 Eskimo. They call it Eskimo. They don't call it the tribe. Equals total blood 5/16. And you're assigned a number, and that number follows you. We're the only people in the country that are tracked and numbered by race. And some quartered, quantified, and classified my blood quantum cabinet. I wanted to literally see it. So I figured out how much blood was in my body and divided it into 16 equal parts. I wanted to make a preserve cabinet. They always talk about preserving bloodlines or things like that. Because I was like, it's not these 5 jars that make me who I am or not. They look the same. So this idea of like definitions of race and ethnicity seemed to oscillate between scientific theory and social construct, between visual construction and political circumstance. And so I kept thinking of different ways to identify this. So these 2 photos, the 2 of them together at the top there, are my tattooed arms that are also at the Renwick Gallery right now. So this is my blood quantum and my enrollment number. And got a lot of questions about that. And I was very nervous to create this. I thought about it for years before I finally made it, because it's like trying to parallel, this other history where people were persecuted based on the race and numbered, but didn't want to isolate or offend anyone. But there is a strong parallel there. And it's a creepy history, like Hitler thought the US was so effective at getting rid of its Indian problem that he got US consultants to come over and help him figure out how to get rid of his problem. And so, rounding them up, putting them in reservations or camps, and go from there. And so it's a dark history, and just wanted to bring it out. And this feeling of, originally I was supposed to stitch the photos together seamlessly, but then when I saw them, I was like, no, that feels appropriate. Some weird math. And I think it creates a lot of questions and problems in the community, because since that's being put on us, like now tribes are rejecting the blood quantum or can define it themselves. It doesn't mean they get to be nationally recognized as Native, but like the Cherokee tribe has no minimum requirement. You can just, if you can prove lineage, because a lot of times it was just whoever's grandma showed up that day. You're food blood, you're not. Like, this is my dad again. My dad and me. So in Alaska, dogs are really important. I grew up in a dog sledding family, and you can see me from very little. I would like crawl all over them and play with them. And we had a lot of dogs. It was pretty common. Like we had 33 dogs when I left Alaska, which is small team by comparison if you're a racer. Like big families that race in Iditarod or the Yukon Quest, the big races, they will have up 100 or more dogs. So I thought that was normal. Everyone I knew had dogs. And my dad got me to start racing from 3 years old to 6. And so like, I really miss dogs. And I was excited to bring the project kind of back to dogs with the Renwick show. So that's me at Little. And then on the right, I'm in the basket there waiting to go on a little ride. That people still use dogs all the time because there's only 3 roads in Alaska, or literally 1, 2, and 3. They make a triangle. But a lot of my work, I draw on this history and this personal experience. I think, art has always been, there's a lot of trauma and alcoholism and violence going on around me. It's why we left Alaska. But I think it's why I latched on to art very early, because it gave me some way to process my feelings and ideas, and just continued from there. So I look at historical things. That's my great grandfather on the right. So I'm all decked out. It was a potlatch day. And so I study a lot of history and try to think about how it would continue to be part of my life now. How does it relate to me now? And so that's them on the left. And on the right side is dogs wearing little dog blankets or tuppies for puppies. And that's what, they're not very well known. And when I was doing an internship at the Museum of the American Indian in summer after, an undergrad, I came across these I was like, what are these? Like, they're like big placemats. They were like, apparently they deck out dogs, like, because the tradition kind of got lost for a while there, and only recently I've seen a few other artists starting to make these again. So they weren't for warmth, they were for decoration. So if you're pulling into a village for like a potlatch or something, they would stop just outside the village and get the dogs all decked out and then enter with like, great, there's a lot of, like my grandfather on the left there, all the shells and jewelry and everything, it's a show of like wealth and connection. And it also shows and demonstrates where you're from, who you are, what your tribe is. And so there's all those little messages built into work that I think is really interesting. So I was looking at dog blankets. And the other thing I was looking at the time was these baby belts or burden straps. And so like nearly every culture has some version of a burden strap. Are the ones we had for babies, like, children were highly, it was an honor and exciting to have a kid. And so anything that has to do with kids, it's often like heavily decorated. Beadwork. This is what a traditional one looks like. A pretty large strap. And like those long tassels there. So I just always thought they're really beautiful objects. Like I knew I wasn't going to have kids, but I just kept thinking about, baby belts, burden straps. And what would my burden be if it's not kids? And so there's an artist on the left there. The other thing that I always thought was really interesting about beadwork was, on the surface, it just looks like vines with little thorns or something coming off of it. But there's a lot of symbolism even in beadwork. A lot of times women's arts or native arts or, indigenous, wherever they are, we're always like, they couldn't possibly be thinking about like complex ideas and symbolisms and metaphors and stuff, but there was lots of messages built into it. It was like the history of quilts. There's a lot more than just a quilt, And so I was taught growing up that those aren't, yes, they're thorns and vines, but they're also what tracks look like when there's a tail going between it and two little feet all the way through. So, I mean, like, I remember being a kid and just being so excited about this secret language. Like my mom showing me the dollar bill and all the symbols there. And I was like, oh my God, like there's a secret language. And if I know it, like, I'm going to know all these things. It was very exciting to me that there could be one message and then also another secret message. And it was thrilling. There's just another image of close up of what the dog tuppies look like. Traditionally, a lot of bells, so make noise and excitement when you come in. I thought it was funny that they used like a beagle shape instead of a husky for the dog shape on the left, but who knows. All right. So science and art. So when I went to Carleton, it was, it's a liberal arts college. So I might be working in the art building and then at lunch, go have lunch with my friends from geology or biology or whatever. Is anyone familiar with what these are? Looks familiar. I have any hands? I can't see. I have to tell them, Carmen. So these are DNA and RNA microarray analyses. And so one of my friends in the biology department at Carleton, I was visiting him at Stanford in grad school, and he was like, I was going to show you these. Like, I don't know what you would do with them, but they're colorful, so I thought you'd like them. I was like, yes. They looked so exciting and cool, and there's so many colors. And just like beadwork, there's a lot of information, even though it just looks like colorful pixels. And the shape of them, I thought, with those green lines, like these identifier lines and info, it reminded me of like a shawl with like fringe hanging down. And so I was just really super fascinated by what they were. And so the way he explained it to me, he was like, so whenever you get a test for a disease or a condition, especially one that affects your DNA or RNA to change or shift, he's like, you're going to see they run these tests, and the colors and patterns will tell you whether or not you have a disease and how much or how advanced it is. And so I don't know how to read them necessarily, but like I know with the red and green ones, for example, the more red that is there, the worse it is. It's just like traffic lights. Red means that you have this disease that they're testing for, and green means it's neutral response. Sometimes they'll test you like a healthy patient to a unhealthy patient, or test a disease with like different parts of your cells, like different reactions, different conditions, but they make a whole bunch of them for all kinds of reasons. And so these just stayed in my mind for a long time. I didn't know what to do with them yet. And so then I started thinking about those baby belts again. And so I wanted to do something like this. My students put this together for me, as I kept questioning, like I said, like what would my burden be today? I like the objects, but how do I make it relevant to me today? And the first thing that popped in my head was diabetes. Diabetes is my burden, or that we have such a high chance of developing it. And so I started thinking about all these different diseases that affect Native populations disproportionately, because our life expectancy is dramatically low compared to every other group, that the things that we die from are often things that could be prevented or at least caught earlier if we actually had access to healthcare or quality healthcare. The Indian health system is famously rough and so much misdiagnosis or neglect or just not listening. So I'm thinking about that. So I wanted to share this little 3-minute video, the video that they play in the Renwick Gallery, that kind of shows some of this. Oops. Do I have to press play on this? Play?
Hi, my name is Erica Lord. I'm an interdisciplinary conceptual artist. I'm Athabaskan and Iñupiat, originally from Alaska, from the village of Nenana. I'm also Finnish, Swedish, English, and Japanese. And that mix or identity kind of plays into my work. Worked in a lot of different mediums. And so I have to try to think about the concept and what medium best carries that message or tells that story. I started racing dogs at 3 years old. Growing up in my house, we had 33 dogs, and that was pretty average for a small racing team. And so when I first moved to Michigan, my biggest cultural shock was asking my mom why people only had 1 or 2 dogs. They are essential to surviving in Alaska, and it's been kind of fun to visualize these projects around these dogs. The series of projects first started with these baby belts or burden straps. I like looking at traditional objects and trying to think about how I might relate to them in my contemporary life. What would my burden be now? And the first thing that I thought of was diabetes. So the first belt that I made was my diabetes burden strap. The colors and patterns in the bead weavings come from microarray analysis tests. These tests that they do on either your DNA or your RNA, and the colors and patterns will help you determine whether or not you have a disease or a condition and how advanced it is. The diseases that I chose affect Native populations disproportionately. We take that original test and we break it up and figure out mathematically how many beads are going to be put in for each color bar. And then we work it out on these grids and organize them. I was really curious about the famous 1925 serum run. it was a relay that ran the diphtheria serum or antitoxin from Anchorage, and it was brought up by train to Nenana and then ran by 20 different mushers and over 100 dogs from Nenana to Nome. Nome had uncontrollable number of cases of diphtheria. And in Alaska, when the weather is bad, it can be weeks before you can get a flight out to the coast. The dog team that is in the installation is a 7-dog team carrying the codes for diphtheria, smallpox and tuberculosis, diabetes and ovarian cancer, and COVID. They are diseases or conditions that are preventable and could be treated early on if we actually had access to quality healthcare. That trip, bringing the serum from Anchorage to Nenana to Nome, it was a responsibility and it was scary and dangerous. And there is that terrifying burden of holding on to that, passing that cure off from one person to the next. But it was also an honor to be selected and be able to be part of that.
Yeah. So the process. One of the things that I like about artists or sculptors, at least that I know of, if something doesn't exist, they'll build it. And if they don't know how to do it, they'll figure it out. So I've never done loom beading before. All the type of work I've done, I don't know if you can see, is like applique type beading that I've done before, but traditional union. But this made sense. The thing that finally clicked it in my head, it's one of those rare aha moments. They don't come that often. I was down at the bead store downtown and I came across these little 4mm cube beads, and something about the shape of them and the cubes, I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. Like, I can use these to be these data points, to use the square beads to translate these tests, and the test then can become these burden belts. And so thank God I have a lot of students that help me out, as I was, so the other funny thing was I went down to the bead store and I was like, I think I need a bead loom. I was reading about bead loom. I think that's what I need. And she brings out this little tiny thing. And I was like, oh, they're small. They're like for bracelets. And she was like, yeah, how big did you need? I was like 6 feet or so. So I started trying to figure it out. And so one of the things, the way that we make these is that I'll find a test. I have a test here and start breaking it up on my computer kind of strategically, so that there's all these strips. So each student or me will grab one of these strips, and this is their map as they start organizing the beads in these little grids. So I used a tile grid and kind of put tape on the back of it and adapted it to, so I realized the thing that was taking me the longest time was that I would put one row on the table, and then I would go to turn to get the needle and bump the table, and they would go all over and I'd have to start again. And I was like, oh, it's the preparation, the organization of it. So we started breaking it down into steps. So the first step is going from the test strip to those grids, and we use those to organize it. And then we go from the grids to these wires, where they just start putting them on some wires with labels, so that the next step, the person that is doing the actual loom weaving can just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they have them all in order. So we could prepare a whole bunch and then hand them off, and it was this, we could all switch positions, or it was very helpful. I was telling Carmen, and I'll come back to this in a minute, 5 years ago, right when I moved back to Santa Fe, I had a horrible bike accident, and I got hit by a car and a truck that drove over me and parked on me. And it broke my back multiple places. And so it was hard. Like I was already pretty slow at producing these, but now I had a broken back where it hurt to sit. I couldn't walk for like a year and a half. And so when I finally was able to start teaching again, my students, that I would teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts, so like one Native art school that I'm aware of in the country. And Carleton gave me a year off when I was an undergrad to come here and focus on art and then go back there. And I think it's that 1 year here that helped make me into the artist that I am today. Something clicked. And so it's a big part of why I wanted to come back to Santa Fe and teach there. And so these are my goofball students here working. And they'll trade off. So I built a loom. Each loom keeps getting bigger and bigger because I needed, something bigger than a bracelet. So like this loom can go anywhere from 4 feet to 9 feet, depending on how big the project is. And so by breaking it down in steps, I realize now I didn't get a diagnosis for ADHD until I was 29. Was not aware of it at all. And now that I know I have it, it's been helpful to know that I work better when I break things down into steps. Otherwise I get overwhelmed by it and I don't know where to start. I just start spinning in the room. So just another shot of the loom and one of my students. And it's been really great to be able to work with them and something and show them kind of how to scale up like a little project you're doing at your home to getting to a big museum and turning it into a whole installation. Because there's no one route to becoming an artist. Accounting, you might go to school for accounting, maybe do an internship and now you're an accountant. It doesn't really work that way as an artist. So it's been really nice to work with them and kind of share the process with them. So that's a close-up of one of the bead straps, and just organizing these little square beads, working on them. That's me in my studio. And so what I do is I take these tests, and they are a literal one-to-one ratio. They're direct translation, because people always ask me if they're actually like actual tests, and or am I just doing pixels or something like that? But so the diseases that I choose affect Native populations disproportionately. And there's a lot of overlap between what affects Natives and what affects Black and Brown people, or just anything. One of the things that I started realizing was that all of these medical tests really focused specifically on, it was only really focused on white men. There wasn't a lot of studies on, the only studies that I could find on Natives were focused primarily on either diabetes or alcoholism and addiction. And that was it. And I realized the way that is taught, or what was studied, what is taught about Natives, definitely affected how my interaction with doctors and medical field in general. And so getting really frustrated. Like I said, I broke my back. Even before I broke my back, I had back problems from tons of years of I was a snowboarder and I played rugby and roller derby and beat myself up. I think I was doing adrenaline sports to deal with all the extra energy I had. But it, over and over again, I can't count the number of times I was told you're not, my pain wasn't real. It was psychosomatic. I was either a drug seeking Native or an anxious woman that just needed to learn to calm down. And I was like, have you tried meditation? I was like, oh. And I was really frustrated because this stuff I was experiencing was real. So here's some of the artwork. That belt on the top is the very first one I made, my diabetes burden strap. And all of these works can be seen at the Renwick Gallery in DC if any of you happen to be there. One on the bottom is breast cancer burden strap, my nephrology, which, or kidney complications due to diabetes. And I think one of the things that I really like about this project is that, kind of reminds, it's always funny when I have studio visits, people are like, what's that? And that's always like, that's cancer and that's another cancer. But, as artists, that's often what we do. We take difficult or hard or painful things and we try to transform them into something that we can deal with. And so these, become burden straps that I can carry. Leukemia burden strap. So my grandma, when she was sick, she kept getting diagnosed. They told her so many different cancers and they weren't listening to her. And so she was told she had leukemia. Then she had something else. Then finally they told her that she had multiple myeloma. And so that's why this one is the most elaborate and beautiful. It's also funny, you can tell we were like, that's like, this is cool, let's make it bigger. Like, that's cool, let's go even bigger. Like, let's add tassels, let's add all the tassels. And so it's fun, even though, challenging, difficult things, but it was a way for me to vocalize and visualize it, and get it out of like spinning in my head and paint in my heart. So we got to, the last exhibition I was in, we got to put it on a mannequin because people are having trouble understanding how it would be worn. So at least once it got to put it on a mannequin. So the Renwick Gallery, the installation is called The Codes We Carry. Because I was thinking about the DNA codes, cultural codes, the dogs are literally carrying codes and how that would relate. So from the 1925 Sarum run with Togo and Balto, if any of you guys have seen, there's movies, both called Togo and Balto. One of them is a Disney film, other ones, I think Balto is by a different animation company. But so if you've seen those movies, you're somewhat familiar with the story. Has anyone seen those movies? Maybe. So that whole story of like the dogs saving the day. Togo and Balto are the names of the two lead dogs that ended the race, like ended the relay. I think Togo handed it off to Balto and Balto finished it. And so people know their names. And what I thought was interesting to current day, when they were working on trying to figure out how to get the COVID-19 vaccine out to all the villages, because one of the problems, like I was saying, is access to healthcare. If you are sick in Alaska, you have to go to Anchorage or Fairbanks. There's no doctors in the village. Like maybe you have a nurse sometimes if you're lucky, but most often you don't. And so when they're trying to get the vaccine out, because if the vaccine hits the villages with no support and no health assistance, it can wipe everyone out pretty quickly. So they knew it was important to get out that vaccine, and they called it Project Togo. Togo is who saved them from diphtheria. Togo is going to save us from COVID. That's the racers. And so, in rural Alaska, you hitch a ride on planes, sleds, water taxis, anything that could get people around Alaska. It's a whole different challenge of trying to get around Alaska. And but they did. People got vaccinated. Oops, wait, I think I went back. So going back to the dogs, I was thinking about those traditional tuppies and how I could adapt them again. And so, like I said in the video, I want to start with diphtheria since that's what the Sarum run first started about. And then I was thinking about historic diseases that we learned from to get to, contemporary vaccines, or so smallpox famously affected natives, like tuberculosis. I didn't know until I was an adult that TB wasn't common everywhere. It's so common in Alaska that, I thought it was normal. It wasn't until I was an adult in Michigan that someone said, of course not, like, this is not around, but it is in Alaska. And natives are 600 times more likely to develop TB than any other group, which is crazy. And then diabetes, ovarian cancer, and then 2 versions of COVID at the bottom there. And we're gonna decorate some dogs. So this is when I finally finished them. I've been working on this project. I never worked on such a large project and for so long. And it's been over 2 years of nonstop work. There were 16 assistants, endless number of volunteers, but finally got there. So diphtheria, looks like this. Smallpox, swing dog, this is their positions, lead dog, swing dog. Tuberculosis, another swing dog. Team dog. Ovarian cancer. And then my last 2 COVIDs. And to finally install them here at the Renwick. So we've got the belts there's on either end of the hall and on the walls, and then the dogs are carrying them. So this was a pretty exciting moment for me. I was like, I can't wait to I want to bring a dog team into this Greek and Roman pillared fancy DC building. Invade the space. They did not want me to stand or sit in the sled, but security let me do it. So one of the things that I was thinking about, part of why, like I said, I moved around in different mediums and stuff, but partly it was when I was broken, but even before that, like I was saying, I was frustrated with the number of times I was told that I was just withdrawing, even though I was not on drugs. They see my ADHD and the way that I move and they assume the worst, and not that maybe I have ADHD. And so that assumptions and judgment or, stereotypes that doctors believed about, because they heard that I was Native and they stopped listening to anything else. But it was always like a picking and choosing of which part they listened to. So, my own challenges and frustrations with the medical system, trying to get the doctors to listen to me, not see me as the worst statistics. It took a lot of reading all those studies that I was looking up every other word to try to understand, realize that when I was telling them I was having weird experiences with certain medications, and they're like, no, you're not, that's pretty rare. And I was like, rare still happens, there's no other studies. What studies focus on mixed race Native people and how they process medicine? And so it wasn't until I started talking to friends, to other Native people, specifically to other mixed race Native women, that I started realizing my experience was not unique, that we were having similar reactions to meds. I don't know if any of you guys know what serotonin syndrome is, but it can be potentially fatal. And it's turns out I can't process serotonin or SSRIs. So every time they're like, you're not in pain, you're just depressed. You're not this, you're just depressed. And they kept loading me up with all these different things. I can't process it. And it can literally fry your brain. And it was only after I think I had hallucinations one time, and they still tried to send me home, told me that I was just going through withdrawals. I was like, how? And then I had a seizure and also weren't listening to me. And that was the final straw that I was like, listen, I get that you're the medical expert and I respect that, but I'm the Erica expert. So when I tell you I'm experiencing something, I need you to listen to me. And it made me feel not so alone when I started comparing notes to other, my friends and family, because I was having serotonin syndrome, even though it's rare. None of the doctors knew about this gene. I had to do a lot of genetic study before I found something that said, this Alaska Native Asian gene can't process these things. So you have to adjust the meds or actually listen to me. And so, statistics that support my experience either do not exist or are hard to find. That took years, and a lot of anger and frustrated art came out of that. But, so that's part of what, like, connecting to other people and talking about stuff. And then next up are my goals. I don't think I'm officially allowed to say, but this is one of my pitches for, there's a new Center for Medical Research, Virology, and Regenerative Medicine being built. And I can't say where, but I'm being considered for one of these big murals that'd be put there. And that, like, talking to this group today, like doing stuff like this, where I can literally take these tests back to the places where they're made, where the research is done. And maybe one person will see it and go, oh, okay, like maybe we should expand our research, or, listen to do studies that are not only on white men, and because the world's not only that anymore. So I'm curious. So hopefully I get this. I want it so bad. I want them to listen to me. So things, what can we do? I can't change my race or which races others choose to see me. I can't hide my ADHD, and many people think it's drugs, but I just have ADHD and I'm uncomfortable because I have a broken back. I can't change my field. I'm an artist. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to actually do the studies myself, but I can, and I do. I have a voice. It took me a while, but I have it. And now I know how to use it, both as a patient and continually as an artist. These days I tell, do my little spiel with doctors, and I'm like, listen, if you're not a doctor that's actually going to listen to me, let me know now, I'll move on. And that has helped, like, finally getting to a point where when I finally find doctors that respect that I'm trying to empower myself, things work better. I talk to friends, comparable experiences, right? The more I talk, the more I realize other experiences are like mine. I discuss my new doctors, my background. I come with a 10-page report of pharmacogenetics test so that they don't poison me with other serotonin things or other things. And so that's why I walk around with statistics and empowered, and they know that I'm doing my research. And I keep making work, hoping someday a researcher, a doctor, a scientist, this group sees this and maybe connects to it. Maybe they find something in it that they relate to. I hope it continues to build conversations that grow in number and with groups. And what brought me here? I don't quit. Don't quit. Don't listen to them if you know in your heart it's not right. I think I'm right mostly, but I know I have a right to be heard, to be seen, and not to be ignored, especially when, like, diabetes or these other things, these conditions that are not visible on the surface, how people treat you or understand you. And so don't quit, and keep beating, keep making. That's most important. Don't let them crush your little voice. Make it bigger.
Erica, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything. It was fantastic. I just wanted to open up for any last questions. I know that we have
Sorry, it's time.
No worries at all. It was fantastic.
Thank you. Oh, stop sharing screen. There we go. And yeah, does anyone have any questions? Has anyone had similar experiences? And if not, that's fun too. And if any of you are in DC area, please go see the show or keep a lookout, and just, I hope there was some connection or it meant the world the first time I talked to someone and they had the same experience, and it didn't make me feel so alone.
Well, thank you so much again. I think our keynote might be next, or one more session, so head over there. But thank you so much, Erica. It was so amazing meeting you. It was an honor, so thank you so much.
Thank you. And yeah, I checked my website's just ericalord.com, and email is just ericalord@gmail. So if any of you guys think of questions later or want to follow up, like, please reach out. I'm happy to talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.